I've got to say, I love the book of Jonah. I love the book of Jonah. He's got to be one of my favorite, certainly my absolute favorite minor prophet. But the reason I like the book of Jonah is the book of Jonah is not about the prophecies. He's preaching to Nineveh. It's not about the prophecies. It's about Jonah. The book of Jonah is about Jonah. And the fact that he went to preach to the Ninevites who were in Assyria, right? The Ninevite was the capital city of Assyria. Remember, Assyria came and demolished the northern kingdom? It's coincidental. It's really about poor old Jonah. So it's a story most people know. So he was called to preach to Nineveh. He runs away. We all know the story that he was trapped in a whale for 3 days. Turns out that is not the first time that has happened to people. Well, he probably was the first. Hey? Well, hang on, watch. I happen to have on video, hang on, no, don't play it just yet. On video, see this yellow paddleboard with two guys on it here? Watch this. So the whale goes, the boat's popping out. Yeah. And now the whatever boat has been left, and they just got gobbled by a whale. And this is not the first time. There are plenty of other kind of examples. If you Google this thing, the most famous one happened 150 years ago, which they think was false. But there was another one where a guy got grabbed off the coast of South Africa and probably got spat back out, right? And so what they were doing is the whales are fishing. They've got all these shoals of fish, and they come up and grab them all in their mouth. And these people are trying to watch all this, and he got inadvertently woofed, gobbled, and it's probably spat back out a few minutes later. Yeah, he will. He'll get spat back. The whale doesn't want him in there. It's not very nice. But it does happen that people get grabbed by whales. So, Pete, do you mind giving me a bit more light, please? Thank you. All right. So, he preaches to Nineveh. Nineveh repents. And Jonah begins to whinge and complain to God. He just does. All right, so first of all, let's just very briefly, Sorry, I haven't got focus. Turn it off, turn it on. Oh, have you plugged the dongle back in? That'll help. There we go. Oh, look at that. Okay, here's the basic story, right? So we all know the story of Jonah, so we won't go to it. Basically, God says, go to Nineveh. Jonah runs in the opposite direction, gets into a boat. God sends a big storm. He gets thrown off the boat, swallowed by a whale for 3 days. He repents. The whale spits him out. God says, go to Nineveh again. So he goes to Nineveh. Nineveh repents. God relents, which is great. And then Jonah just gets upset. He just has a stink. And so Jonah sits on the bank and he says, let's see if God's still going to destroy them. Come on. Fight. And so he waits to see if God's going to judge Nineveh. So God sends a vine to shade Jonah. And then the next night he sends a worm to eat the vine. And then he sends a hot wind to hurt, and then Jonah gets upset again. And then God uses that to speak to his attitude. And he said, shouldn't I care about all these people? There's 120,000 people in Nineveh. And animals, he says, and animals. And so there's this aspect where this is all about dear old Jonah. So there's a couple of really pretty things that I've seen in here. The first one I want to show you is what I've called Jonah's descent. So when he's in his state of rebellion, there's this repeated word or concept in the text where he just keeps going down. So he says, I went down to Joppa. So maybe from Jerusalem or somewhere, he went down to Joppa. I think he was in the northern kingdom, actually. Down to Joppa. He paid a fare and went down to the boat. he went into the boat and went down to the lowest part of the vessel. And then the storm came, so they picked up Jonah and threw him down into the sea. And then the Lord appointed of him to swallow Jonah, which then, he says in his prayer, I sank down to the foundation of the mountains. So you've got this imagery of going down, 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 down. So I thought that was quite interesting. Then you've got an aspect of God's provision. Now, I'm using CSB, and so it uses the word appointed. In NIV, it uses the word God provided, which is lovely. God provided something. So what did God provide? First of all, God threw a great wind, a great storm. Then he appointed a fish. And then he appointed a plant. And then he appointed a worm. And then he appointed a scorching east wind. All these things that God provided. So, okay, this guy is a prophet. He hears from God. He knows about what God's will is. He knows the heart of God. We see that later on. He knew God was going to forgive them. That's part of why he got upset. He hears God and he knows his voice. And yet God is using circumstances to guide him. Interesting. And so I was challenged and I thought, what has God provided in my life to help guide me? All these things that God has appointed, provided. He provides a worm, he provides the sun, he provides the wind to help guide his poor little servant Jonah. What has God provided? The other thing that I thought was interesting is that every time he speaks, there is revival. Just to think about it. So when he was on the boat and they said, you know, what have you done? It says, well, he answered them. That's Jonah talking. And then the scripture says, then the men on the boat were seized with a great fear. Right? So they called out to the Lord. And they picked him up. They threw him off the boat. And then they were seized by another great fear of the Lord. And they offered sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. So then Jonah goes to Nineveh. He proclaims to Nineveh. And then the people of Nineveh believe God and proclaim a fast. And then the king puts on sackcloth and fasts and repents. Every single time he speaks, there's revival. People falling down, people seeking the God, the fear of the Lord, the presence of God coming on these people. He's a successful prophet. He's a very successful prophet. And so the question then remains, here we go. Jonah was greatly displeased. This is after God refuses to judge the Ninevites because they repented. He was greatly displeased and became furious. And he prayed to the Lord, please, Lord, isn't this what I said while I was still in my own? I told you so, right? While I was still in my own country. That's why I fled in the first place. I knew that you were gracious. I knew you were a compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in faithful love, the one who relents from sending disaster. And now, Lord, take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. Wow. He's got issues. Poor old Jonah. So my thought, I was trying to work out, why was he so upset? I mean, what's his beef, right? First of all, maybe, these are just some ideas, maybe he really could see what the Assyrians were like. He didn't want them to be let off. He wanted them punished. I want them punished, you know. Maybe he felt he was wasting his time. Or maybe he liked being a successful prophet. You know, they said in the Old Testament, remember Moses? You know a real prophet because what they say will happen. Well, hang on, he promised something. And then they repented and it didn't happen. Well, God didn't send it because they repented. But maybe he likes being a successful prophet. Maybe there's a bit of pride happening in there. Or maybe the whole reason he says, I want to die now, is because he worries that people will kill him if he's not a true prophet, because what he said didn't happen. I don't know. We don't know. But we do know that there's this lovely book about this stubborn little guy who can clearly hear from God. And God, in all of his mercy, isn't just showing love and tender kindness to the Ninevites. He's sending it to, he's showing it to Jonah too. It's also lovely to see sending a prophet to another nation, because God says, he says about these people, he says, look, there's at least 120,000 people there and animals who can't tell their right hand from their left. Right? These people don't know they don't know about Moses, they don't know about the law, they don't know the teachings of the prophets, anything. They don't know anything about God, but he still loves them where they're at. And he's trying to get people to help him. Sometimes God sends us to people we don't like. Oh, there's a whole sermon there. sends us to people we don't like.